It's amazing to me, you know, how much dogs can actually say, even though, well, they don't actually talk. It's
Yeah,
like they have this whole secret language they're using all the time, a language of posture and expressions and little movements. And if we can learn to crack the code, I think it can really transform our relationships with our dogs.
I completely agree. And thankfully, there's a lot we can learn about this secret language from the sources we've got for this deep dive today.
So in this episode, we're going to try to really get into the nitty-gritty of canine body language.
Exactly. We'll cover some of the basics, but we'll also get into some of those more subtle signals that a lot of owners might miss. And then we'll even touch on training approaches that can actually improve communication between you and your dog.
Sounds good. Let's start with a really obvious one. Tails. I mean, most people think a wagging tail equals a happy dog. But the stuff we've been reading suggests it's not quite that simple.
It really isn't. It's more nuanced than that. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. When a dog holds their tail high and stiff, it often means they're trying to appear larger and more intimidating. Like a holdover from their wild ancestors, trying to protect their territory or their resources.
I see. So it's not necessarily aggression, but it is a sign they're on alert, maybe feeling a little tense.
Yeah, exactly. On the other hand, a relaxed, kind of neutral tail position, that usually means the dog is feeling pretty chill, content with their surroundings.
And then, of course, there's the tucked tail.
Right. That one's usually a pretty clear signal of fear or submission. Like the
Yeah.
dog is trying to make themselves as small as possible.
And what about that wag? We've got to talk about the wag.
Of course, like you said, everyone associates a wagging tail with happiness. But the speed of the wag, even the direction it's wagging, can actually change the meaning.
Oh, really? So a slow wag means something different from a fast wag.
Right. And a wag that's biased more to the right side of the body can actually have a different meaning than a wag that's biased to the left.
Wow, I had no idea. So it's not just about whether the tail is wagging, but how it's wagging.
Exactly. It's
Right.
just one piece of the puzzle. You have to look at the whole picture. Speaking of which, let's move up to the head. Those ears can tell you a lot, too.
Yeah, ears are super expressive. It's like they're these little radar dishes, constantly moving around, picking up on everything.
That's a great way to put it. When the ears are forward, that's usually a pretty straightforward signal. The dog is interested in something, paying attention.
Right. But what about when the ears are back or flattened against the head?
Well, flattened ears usually go hand in hand with fear or submission. It's kind of like tucking the tail. The dog is trying to make themselves smaller, less noticeable.
Interesting. So it's like they're trying to say, don't mind me, I'm not a threat.
Exactly. And then relaxed ears, kind of just hanging naturally. That typically means the dog is feeling comfortable and safe in their environment.
That makes sense. So we've got tails and ears. What about the overall body posture? I've always loved the playbow. It's so clear what it means. Front legs down, rear end up in the air, like let's play.
Oh, absolutely. The playbow is one of the most universally understood dog signals. It's their way of saying, hey, let's have some fun. This is all in good spirit.
It's impossible to misinterpret. But then you have the opposite, like when a dog is stiff, leaning forward, that seems to signal something very different.
Yeah, that stiff forward-leaning posture can definitely be a red flag. The sources we read talked about how that can indicate potential aggression, or it could mean the dog is super focused on something, like they're about to pounce. But there's definitely a sense of tension there.
You can almost feel the intensity radiating off them. And then, of course, you have those dogs who are just completely relaxed, just sprawled out on the floor, totally at ease.
Right. That loose, relaxed body language is a pretty clear sign that the dog is feeling comfortable and safe in their environment. No tension, no worries.
And then, sadly, there's the cowering posture, head down, body lowered, maybe even a little trembling.
Yeah, that one's heartbreaking to see. It's a clear sign of fear and submission, like the dog is trying to make themselves as small and unthreatening as possible.
Okay, so we've covered tails, ears, overall body posture. What about facial expressions? It seems like a lot of communication happens in the face as well.
Oh, for sure. You can learn a lot just by looking at a dog's face.
Mm.
For example, a relaxed mouth, maybe slightly open. That usually means contentment.
I love when they have that soft, slightly open mouth. It's so cute. But then you see the opposite, like when the jaw is tense or the mouth is clamped shut. That seems to signal something different.
Definitely. A tense jaw or a closed mouth can be a subtle sign that the dog is feeling stressed or anxious about something. It might not be super obvious, but if you're paying attention, you can pick up on it.
So it's not just about big, dramatic expressions, but also these smaller, subtler cues.
Right. And then there's yawning and lip licking.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, dogs yawn when they're tired, just like we do. But sometimes a yawn can actually be a sign of stress.
Really? It's like they're trying to calm themselves down?
Exactly. Lip licking can be the same way. It can be a way for the dog to try and diffuse a tense situation.
Wow, I never knew that. And then there's whale eye. That one always seems significant, when you can see the whites of their eyes.
Yeah, whale eye is definitely something to pay attention to.
Hmm.
It usually means the dog is feeling scared or anxious, like they're anticipating something bad might happen.
So if you see whale eye, it's probably a good idea to give the dog some space.
Definitely. Now, when it comes to eye contact, a soft gaze usually means the dog feels comfortable and trusts you.
Right. It's like they're saying, I'm cool with you.
Exactly.
Mm.
But a hard stare, when they're really locking eyes with you, that can be a challenge or a threat.
Hmm.
Or it could just mean they're super focused on something, like a squirrel in the yard.
And then avoiding eye contact altogether, that can actually be a calming signal, right?
Yeah, often it is. It's the dog's way of saying, look, I'm no threat. I'm not trying to start anything.
So there's really a lot we can learn just from paying attention to a dog's eyes.
Absolutely. And while our main focus today is body language, we should mention that vocalizations are important too. I mean, barks, growls, whines, howls, those are all part of how dogs communicate.
Right. I mean, even though we're not going to get into the specifics of each sound, it's important to remember that those sounds add another layer of meaning to everything else we're talking about.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Now, one thing I found really fascinating in the sources we read was the concept of calming signals. Can you explain what those are?
Sure. Calming signals are basically behaviors that dogs use to try and de-escalate a tense situation. Like, let's say you're meeting a new dog for the first time and they start sniffing the ground really intensely. That's not necessarily because they're actually interested in what's on the ground. They might be using that sniffing behavior as a way to calm themselves down.
So it's a way to avoid a potential confrontation.
Exactly. Another calming signal is turning their head or body away from something that's making them nervous.
So it's like they're saying, look, I'm not interested in fighting. Let's just chill.
Exactly. And sometimes dogs will move really slowly and deliberately as a way to signal that they're not a threat.
So they're using their body language to communicate their intentions.
Exactly. And we talked about lip licking and yawning earlier. Those can also be calming signals.
So basically, dogs have this whole repertoire of subtle behaviors they use to try and make themselves and others feel more comfortable.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to remember that you can't just interpret one signal in isolation. You have to look at the whole picture.
Context is everything, right?
Exactly. Like a wagging tail might seem like a good thing, but if the dog's body is stiff, their hair is standing on end, and they're giving you a hard stare, that wag probably doesn't mean what you think it means.
So we need to pay attention to all the signals, not just the obvious ones.
Right? And now that we've talked about all these signals, let's talk about how we, as humans, can become better communicators with our dogs.
Yeah, how do we make sure we're not misinterpreting what they're trying to tell us?
Well, first and foremost, we need to respect their signals. If a dog is showing signs of discomfort, like backing away, showing whale eye, or licking their lips a lot, we need to give them space and not force them into a situation that's making them anxious.
So we need to be sensitive to their feelings.
Absolutely. Another important thing is to be consistent with our own cues and responses. Dogs thrive on predictability. So if we use the same words and gestures every time, and we react the same way to their behavior every time, it makes it much easier for them to understand what we want from them.
So consistency is key.
Yes, it is. And of course, positive reinforcement is huge. When we reward our dogs for doing something we like, it makes them more likely to do it again in the future.
It strengthens the communication between us.
Exactly. Now, the sources we read also talked about this program called Brain Training for Dogs and how it can actually help improve communication. Have you heard of that?
And I have. I'm actually really curious about it. How does it work?
Well, the basic idea is that mental stimulation can help dogs become more receptive to training and more attuned to our cues.
So it's not just about physical exercise, but mental exercise as well.
Right. The program teaches owners how to recognize those subtle body language signals we've been talking about. And it provides a framework for training that really strengthens the bond between owner and dog.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like we're both learning each other's languages. Now, I know we all want to think our dogs are perfect angels, but the truth is, sometimes they do things that make us frustrated. And the sources we read highlighted some common ways we misinterpret our dog's behavior, especially when they've done something wrong.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like that guilty look so many dogs get when they know they've messed up.
I know exactly what you mean. My dog does that all the time. But is that guilty look really what we think it is?
Probably not. What the experts say is that dogs don't really experience guilt the same way we do. So when they're giving us that guilty look, it's more likely that they're just afraid of our reaction.
So they're not actually feeling guilty, they're just scared of getting in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another common misinterpretation is jumping up. A lot of people see that as a dominance thing, like the dog is trying to assert their authority.
Right. But that's not really what's going on, is it?
Not usually. Most of the time when a dog jumps up, it's just because they're excited to see us.
So it's more about enthusiasm than dominance.
Right. And then, of course, there's barking. Some people assume that any barking is a sign of aggression, but that's definitely not true.
I mean, dogs bark for all sorts of reasons, right?
Exactly. They might be barking to alert us to something, or to say hello, or to ask for something, or even just because they're bored.
So again, it's all about context.
Exactly. And then just to reiterate this one more time because it's so important, a wagging tail does not always mean a happy dog.
So we need to be careful about assuming we know what our dog is thinking based on just one signal.
Exactly. We need to consider the whole picture.
So it sounds like the key to building a strong relationship with our dogs is to learn how to understand their language and respond to it appropriately.
That's exactly right. When we take the time to learn what our dogs are trying to tell us, we're showing them that we respect them and that we care about their needs. And that builds trust and strengthens our bond with them.
And that trust is essential for a happy and harmonious relationship.
Absolutely. It's the foundation of everything.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to remember is that learning to understand your dog's body language is an ongoing process. It takes time, patience, and observation.
It's like learning any new language. You're not going to become fluent overnight.
Exactly. But the more you pay attention to your dog's signals and respond to them appropriately, the stronger your bond will become. And as we mentioned earlier, there are resources out there like brain training for dogs that can provide a structured approach to learning about canine communication.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with this. Even though we've talked about a lot of general principles of dog body language today, every dog is an individual and they all have their own unique ways of communicating.
That's so true.
So I encourage you to become a student of your own dog. Pay attention to their subtle cues. Notice what makes them happy, what makes them anxious, what makes them excited, and think about how you can adjust your own behavior to make them feel safe, loved, and understood.
That's great advice.
Because when we truly understand our dogs, we can create a relationship that's based on mutual trust, respect, and, of course, lots of love.
Couldn't have said it better myself.